Hello everybody, I just wanted to make another quick update video because I was going through the Moggwarts deck, gold fishing for way too long. I was up way too late. Work was a lot tougher than I was willing to admit, but it was worth it because I made some discoveries about how I'd play the Moggwarts deck, made a couple of changes, and I just wanted to go over those changes to kind of solidify the deck list that I'm going to be starting off going hard for. Well, going real, playing a lot. Well, yeah, that way. The first most important change, like the absolute most important change, which I'm really excited for, is I got the best art for the chromatic star, baby. Look at that. That is easily what a chromatic star should look like. Oh my god. Hey, yeah, I got new art for chromatic star. The real big change that I wanted to put into the deck is instead of 3 copies of Faithless Looting, I'm adding 3 copies of Costly Plunder. You might look at this and you'll see it is an objectively worse version than Deadly Dispute, because Deadly Dispute, they're both the exact same card. They're commons, one generic, one black. They're instants. They both have the same sacrifice cost of either a creature or an artifact. They both draw 2 cards. Deadly Dispute makes a treasure token. So Deadly Dispute is always going to be better in every single way. That being said, we can only run 4 copies of Deadly Dispute, and we have to replace... If we're going to run more of the same effect, we have to run, a different card. That's why I chose to go with Costly Plunder. Because for all intents and purposes, even though this treasure token is going to be super relevant in a lot of scenarios, I still like the idea of sacrificing an artifact or creature to draw 2 cards. The reason I'm going down this route as opposed to the Faithless Looting is because when I'm looking to brute force through my deck, I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want to explain this. But basically, so if I start off the game, Faithless Looting is really only better than Costly Plunder as a turn 1 play. Granted, a lot of other versions of the deck that are also running Faithless Looting, I guess this is another benefit of Faithless Looting, is that most versions of the deck are not running as many artifacts. Like, yes, people are running the 4 Ichor Wellsprings. Yes, people are running the 4 Chromatic Stars. And, of course, you got the artifact lands, and I'm probably even running less artifact lands than some other deck lists are running. However, I'm running 3 of the Wedding Invitation, which in of itself is an artifact. So I have a lot of artifact cards, not to mention... I'm also running Carrion Feeder, which is a creature that, worst case scenario, if I absolutely needed to do this, I could still sacrifice it to Costly Plunder. So I have more kind of resources in my deck that I can consistently use for the additional cost of sacrificing an artifact or a creature. So honestly, I'm chalking most of that up to the Wedding Invitation. So just because I'm running this card, I think that Costly Plunder is going to work better, more consistently than Faithless Looting. But realistically, with Faithless Looting, for one thing, it forces discard, which I don't like. Yes, it's not going to matter too much when you already have a full hand, and within that regard, maybe Faithless Looting is better. It also only costs 1 mana as opposed to the 2 of either Deadly Dispute or Costly Plunder. So within your first turn or 2, there's an argument to be made of Faithless Looting being better. But at the end of the day, with Faithless Looting, you are drawing 2 cards and you must discard 3 cards. Like you're discarding 2 cards from the Faithless Looting, but you're also using the Faithless Looting itself. So, even though you're looting through your deck, it's still a 2 for 3. with Costly Plunder, now granted, let's say you're putting in Ichor Wellspring, so there is a little bit of an investment beforehand. But with Costly Plunder, or let's just say Costly Plunder, because I don't want to bring the token into this argument. What you're doing if you're sacrificing one of these cards as an artifact. So you put out the Ichor Wellspring to draw one card that's already a 1-for-1, and then with Costly Plunder, that's a 1-for-3, because you're drawing 2 cards off of this, and then you already have the Ichor Wellspring, drawing the additional card. So already that's a 4-for-2. A 4-for-2, as opposed to a 2-for-3, feels like it's so much more in favor of what we're trying to do, because not only are you realistically drawing more cards off of that, you're also not relying on Unearth to get back anything that you're throwing into your graveyard from the Faithless Looting. And even if you get to the point where you are overdrawing with the Costly Plunder or the Deadly Dispute, which is going to happen a lot. Like, I played like 1 or 2 games so far, did decently well. I won both of them. But I've goldfished this deck a lot. And there's so many of those games, once I started using the Costly Plunder, where I had to end a turn and discard down to hand size. So I'm still going to be discarding cards ultimately, but I'm still always guaranteed a full hand. And I feel like I have more control over what cards I get to discard. That's more of a feeling thing, more of a preference thing. I know that's realistically not true, because you still get to choose which cards you discard through Faithless Looting. But I think overall it feels better. It's also a point where, this really hasn't happened to me. I can't really see a situation in which this would happen. But if you do get low on cards, then, like, let's say you end up with like 2 cards in hand, but then you Costly Plunder Ichor Wellspring, you're drawing back up to a hand size. You're not losing anything. You're not looting through anything. You are actually drawing and net gaining on cards. So at the end of it, that's kind of how I'm just understanding it. Realistically, what led to this decision was, at the end of the day, when I was gold fishing through the old version, I just kind of felt like, every time I drew a Faithless Looting, I just kind of looked at it and I'm like, I really wish this was a Deadly Dispute. So the logical thing to do is to find another card that's similar to Deadly Dispute, and I found Costly Plunder. So this is essentially Deadly Dispute copies 5, 6, 7, and the deck has felt really nice off of that. Otherwise, no other changes to main board. For the sideboard, I think I kind of solidified what I'm looking for. I'm not going to go too much into the lessons. I already went through that in the other video. Already talked about why Gorilla Shaman's good against Affinity. Duress is just good in general. Pyroblast. The very good, very typical anti-counter matchup, anti-blue card. I think... Now, granted, this is probably my weakness. I don't know too much about sideboarding in Pauper, but what I'd imagine is if I'm up against a very rough matchup that is heavy on control, I'd want to bring in the Pyroblasts and the Duress. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I don't know yet. Sideboarding is something I have to play around with a lot. But Pyroblast, it just feels like a really good card overall. So that's why it's there. The only other addition, Pyromatics. I don't necessarily love or hate this card. I think it's a really interesting inclusion in the sideboard, and this is something that a lot of Moggwarts decks have been including in their sideboard, and I think I figured out why. It's essentially, it fills the exact same role as the munitions. I forget what that enchantment is. The munitions card that is the primary win condition, or one of the primary win conditions for the traditional list. This is essentially another copy of that in instant form. So this, in a very convoluted way, feels like another copy of Pyroblast, in that, you know, once you get the infinite red mana loop going, and you are guaranteed to have infinite red mana, if your opponent tries to disrupt, you know, anything with the munitions card, pretty much the munitions card, if your opponent is trying to disrupt that, then Pyromatics is an instant form of that card. So you use your infinite red mana to respond to whatever your opponent is trying to do. And that will kind of allow you to win the game on its own. Pretty much this is, because this is an instant, but it's the exact same thing as the traditional win condition. It's almost like, I know this isn't 100% true, so realistically don't quote me on this, but this almost feels like giving your munitions card split second. Because if your opponent tries to gotcha with one way to interrupt your combo, and then in response you have this, you're back right where you started while your opponent's interruption is on the stack. And I think with a lot of enchantment interruption, because with the munitions card, I think there's an additional sacrifice cost, so it can get a little bit clunky, can get a little bit convoluted. So I think that's where Pyromatics comes in, as, you know, just having that extra copy. Treat it sort of like a counterspell while you're trying to combo off, or treat it like a split second reaction while you're trying to combo off. But throwing this, you know, having this in the sideboard just feels like nice tech. I would never run in the main board. And honestly, I probably don't need to run this at all, because you aren't interrupting impact tremors the same way that you're interrupting the munitions card. I don't know. I'll be honest, I'm just kind of like theorizing things. Like, I understand that the biggest benefit of Pyromatics is that it does exactly what you want it to do, what you want the deck to do at instant speed. So I kind of get that. But I haven't seen like too many interactions with the munitions card, so I don't know a whole lot about what it does. But overall, I think it's useful, so I put one copy in there. And then the lessons cards, I included Introduction to Annihilation. This feels like, this card is essentially another form of duress that you can pull out from the sideboard, because it's going to exile target non-land permanent. It's going to exile any permanent that's, you know, well, not a land, but anything that's really giving you trouble with the combo. I haven't played anywhere near enough Pauper to know what might possibly do that. But in the absolute event that I needed to, and I'm already on the infinite red mana loop, 5 generic mana is not an issue in the absolute slightest. So I kind of like this as, you know, literally a silver bullet that you can get off of the learn mechanic, and you don't even need to bring it in from the sideboard. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a dead card. I still have a lot of work to do with the sideboard overall, but I at least wanted to go through the thought process there. Gorilla Shaman's good for affinity. You got the lessons cards, and when you're up against a control matchup, here's your 8. If you really need to, here's a 9th. And yeah, I think that's essentially how I'm looking at the sideboard right now. Anyway, the whole point I wanted to make this video was to talk about the benefits of Costly Blunder and the sweet art on Chromatic Star. So yeah, quick update. Games will be happening soon. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.